Hello, welcome to our first lesson for Math 103, Mathematical Reasoning. We're covering Section 4A. This is the first section for the Personal Finance Unit. In this section, we're going to cover budgeting and some of the basics of personal finance. So there's lots of advice on how to control your finances. There's tons of books out there. You could read all about it all the time. But in the end, it all comes back to just the same idea. You need to know how much money you're earning, and you need to know how much you're spending. And then you need to find a way to spend less than you earn. You can't continually spend more than you earn. If you do, eventually you'll just run out of money. You will not be able to live that way. You need to make more than you spend so that you have money you can put away for later, so you can save for a rainy day, for a medical emergency, for getting a car repaired, that kind of thing. Part of doing this, first off, you need to know your bank balance. It's important to keep track of your balance in your savings accounts. If you don't do that, you can do things like bounce checks, or your debit card will get rejected. It also encourages you to spend at a better level. If your bank account is getting low and you know it, then you're maybe less likely to do the impulse buys or spend extra money on things you don't need. People that don't keep track of their bank account can tend to overspend because they just don't know what they have. Next, you need to know what you spend. People are really good about just swiping a card and not even looking at what they do. I'm actually one of those that's really bad about that. I always give my wife props because she's much better at noticing when we go to the store and swipe our debit card how much we actually spent that day. And so that's important, especially these cashless purchases, whether you're doing Apple Pay or swiping a debit card. Since you're not handing over actual cash, it's easy to spend more than you really think you are. It's important to try and spend, within your levels, your means, not to overspend what you should be spending. And part of that is knowing how much you're spending. Every time you go and make a purchase, to think about, okay, how much did I actually spend on this, including the tax and fees? How much did this cost me? Keep an idea about that. Avoid impulse buys. Stores, are really good at setting up things that you don't really need in places where you'll see them, and you might grab them right away, especially, smaller priced items. And so you really just got to be careful not to buy things really quickly, especially things that maybe are bigger purchases. It's good to shop around, look for a better deal. Think about, do I really need this? Do I have an alternative to buying this? It's tempting sometimes just to get it, without taking the time to have those thoughts and to avoid spending too much on things we don't really need. Then make a budget. So a budget, you want to think about what you're going to spend on different things throughout the month, and then try not to overspend it. Try not to spend more than you're planning on. Usually to make a budget, you do kind of have to have an idea of how much you're making and what you typically spend on things, and so that way you can be set up to do that. And we'll talk more about making a budget here in a minute because it's going to be a big part of this one. So part of doing all this is kind of thinking about the spending you do have. So let's do an example with spending. So Katie is usually in a hurry to get to class after work and usually doesn't have a lot of time for getting a meal prepared. So instead, she's stopped by one of her favorite fast food joints and pays about $14 for a value meal. Of course, that's an important number right there, is the fact that she's spending $14 on that meal. It doesn't sound that terrible. A lot of value meals are more expensive than that. And it's just one meal, except for the fact that she's doing this throughout the week. Katie thinks it's not too big a cost because she only has class 4 days a week. She's thinking, well, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I'm not spending this. It's just those 4 days I have class. She figures she could save money preparing something at home. It'd probably be cheaper to do that, but it's probably not enough to matter, right? Well, let's think about it. If she's spending $14 for a value meal, that's just the price for just the one meal, so $40 per meal. But she's doing that 4 times a week, right? Because she's spending this every time she goes to class. She's stopping, she's getting food instead of preparing something at home or bringing something. So 4 times per week, so 4 meals per week. And then the big thing is to think about the fact that this isn't just 1 week's worth of meals, right? She's doing this throughout the entire semester. A semester is actually typically 16 weeks. So there's 16 weeks per semester. So she's not just spending that $14 once, she's not just spending it 4 times, she's actually spending it every week for 16 weeks. 4 times per week she's doing this. So to find out how much she's spending, well, we think about that $14 per meal. Well, that's 4 times a week, so let's multiply that by 4, and that'll give her a week's worth. But she's doing that 16 weeks from the semester, so let's do that times 16, and that'll give us the total for the semester. So we multiply that out, her $14 meal, 4 times a week, and 16 times for the semester actually ends up being $896. So in that semester, she spent almost $1,000 just on 4 meals a week. The big thing here is if this was her food bill for the whole semester, she'd probably be doing really good, but it's not. It's just for those 4 meals that she's getting each week. It's not for the weekends. It's not for breakfast or the other meal of the day. So she could really probably save a lot of money. If she could cut this down and spend, a third of this, she'd be saving close to $600. That could probably pay for quite a bit of her books or for something else big, maybe buy her a nice laptop to use for the semester. And a lot of times if you go and talk to a personal finance expert, someone who tries to help people get their finances in order, they'll mention that little things like this that happen repeatedly through a long period of time can actually be some of the biggest ways to save money. Here, she could save almost $1,000 if she could get a cheaper way of doing this, especially if she could just eat the food that's already in her house. A lot of college students have parents, if they can eat their parents' food instead of spending their money on their own food, you can save a lot of money doing that. It doesn't seem like a big deal, the $14 per meal, but it adds up pretty quickly, throughout the one semester. Okay, next page. Paying interest. One large expense people have a hard time tracking is interest payments on loans. We often need to do percentage calculations to determine cost and interest on a loan. People aren't always comfortable with percentage, so sometimes we get lost on that. So let's do a couple of problems to talk about the percentages that happen. So first example, Gail has gotten in financial trouble in the past, but recently he's been trying to keep better track of his spending. Despite this, he still has an average credit card balance of $1,800. His credit card company charges him a 27% annual interest rate. Assume the monthly interest rate is 1/12 of his annual rate, and then find the monthly interest payment Gail makes on his credit card balance. It's important to note when you're working with interest, most interest rates are given in a yearly or an annual situation. So like this annual rate, this 27%, that's a year's worth of interest. So he wouldn't really actually get charged 27% unless the money was there for a whole year. He only gets charged a portion of that each month. So 27% is for the year. You really have to watch that with interest rates. Some interest rates are yearly, some are monthly. They need to be you need to take into account the frequency, because that really determines whether it's a good or bad interest rate, if it's high or low. Okay, his card balance is $1,800. So he's paying interest on these $1,800. It's a 27% interest. He's only going to pay 1/12. So we don't really need to use the 27% because that's for a whole year. So first thing we can do is we actually can just take that 27 and we can divide it by 12. 1/12 or divide by 12. That will tell us how much is actually going to get charged each month. So if we take 27 divide by 12, divide by 12, we get 2.25. So he's going to pay 2.25% per month. So that's going to be his per month. In real life, there's a little variation for longer months, shorter months, stuff like that. But on average, it's about 2.25% per month. That is on this $1,800, right? He's carrying $1,800 on this credit card that he hasn't paid off. We're trying to find a percentage of a number. We're going to multiply. So we're going to multiply that by his 2.25%. Be careful when you want to multiply things like this. You can use a percent button in the TI-30 calculator I use. But most of the time, people don't have fancy calculators. They need to turn this into a decimal before they can multiply. So let's change this. Instead of having a percent, let's turn this to a decimal. To get rid of the percent, we need to move the decimal 2 spots. We're going to move 2 spots over here. So we get 0.0225. Later on, we're going to have a semester project. And one of the big mistakes I see on that project is people not working with their decimals correctly. They'll have like a 7% loan, and they're charging 700% interest because they just put the decimal in the right spot. So be really careful about your decimals. Remember, if it's in percent form and you need to be working in decimal, because you're typing a calculator or typing a formula, most of our formulas require to be decimal form. You need to move the decimal 2 spots to get it to that percent form. So something like 2% is going to look like 0.02. So I'm going to multiply 1,800 times that 0.0225, because that's our decimal, or for that percent. And we see that we are paying $40.50, or Gail is paying. So $40.50, because that is 2.25% of that 1,800. So this is a per month payment. So just by having this balance, Gail is losing $40 each month just because of the interest rate. And that's a decent chunk of money. Every month he's paying $40 just because he hasn't paid off this credit card. If he paid off the credit card and didn't have to pay that interest, we could save him on money. He could actually go walk into a bank, take out a personal loan at maybe like 4 or 5% annual interest rate, and then pay off this credit card balance, and then he'd be paying 1/5 or even less of the interest. So he could pay like $8 a month. He could save $32 a month just by walking to a bank and saying, "Hey, I've got a credit card that I've got balance on. I need to borrow $2,000 so I can pay that off, and then I don't have to pay, the high interest level." So credit cards typically have pretty high interest rates, and they can cost a lot. So if you don't want to pay a lot of money in interest, try not to carry a balance on your credit card. Pay off each month, and if you're stuck with a balance and you don't have the money in cash to pay it off, borrow some. This would be a situation where I would, if I couldn't get a loan, me too. On the other side, I would talk to a close friend or family member and say, "Hey, I'm going to borrow. May I borrow $7, and I'll pay you back." You could even pay them with interest. And as long as you're not paying 27% interest, you'd still be saving money. So that would be his monthly payment. So be really careful about interest, because interest can add up. If he carries this balance very long, he's going to be paying hundreds of dollars in interest payments to this bank just because he didn't pay off that $1,800. So that's his monthly interest payment. All right, John. John purchased a motorcycle for $2,800. He made a down payment of $300, financed the rest of the balance through the dealer. However, he failed to make the first payment and now must pay 7% interest per month on the balance. And we want to find John's monthly interest payment. So a couple things to note here. So he bought a motorcycle, right? So $2,800, that was the price of the motorcycle. Notice, though, that he doesn't borrow all of that. He makes a down payment. Down payments are important when you're talking about finance, when you're borrowing money. A lot of times you'll have a price of something, like you go to buy a house and it'll have a certain cost, but you'll put some money down. That means that you're putting your money right away. You're paying a portion of it. In this case, his down payment was $300. So he paid $300 cash. He didn't borrow the full $2,800. He only borrowed what's left after he paid $300 cash. So of course, if I take my $2,800 price and I subtract the $300 down payment, then you get his actual loan amount, which is going to be $2,500. This is how much he actually has to borrow. That's the loan. And we'll see this when we get to house loans and stuff later. When we get to the mortgage project, that'll come up again. It's important to note that down payment is money that you're paying right off the bat, and so then you don't have to borrow that money, right? He didn't have to borrow the $300 part of that $2,800 because he paid it right away. Banks really like you to do that, to put a down payment down. Part of the reason is if you have some of your money invested in what you bought, you're less likely to just let it get trashed and walk away from it. There are people that do that. They'll buy a car or a house, and if they have a really low down payment or no down payment, because there's situations where you have no down payment, and you end up in a situation where you owe money on the house and you just can't make payments, you might just say, okay, I'm just done. I'm going to walk away from the house. The bank can repossess it. They can have it back. Well, if you have a couple $1,000s in that house already when you first get it, you're a little less likely to just walk away and be like, hey, the bank can take the house back. I don't have much money in there. The more money you have into it, the more invested you are. So the bank feels comfortable about loaning you the $2,500 because they know you already spent $300 on the. So they're not as worried that you're going to, just away from the loan and they're going to be stuck with the motorcycle. The bank doesn't want to, rather you have the money, you're going to pay him back. Okay, so we know he borrowed $2,500. financing through the dealer. So the dealer is saying, okay, you can pay me in installments, pay me in, payments. Now he missed the timing on the first payment, so he was a little slow, didn't get that done in time. And what happened is he ended up with a higher interest level, and that happens with a lot of these like financing deals where you go buy a car, stuff like that. Or if you don't make your payment, they say, hey, you have like 0% interest, 0% down, that kind of thing. But if you don't make a payment, or if you're late on the payment, then instead of the 0% interest, all of a sudden you're paying 7% or more. And 7% doesn't sound that bad until you notice that this is actually 7% per month. That's not a yearly rate, that's a monthly rate. The previous one I mentioned that was kind of high, we had a 2.25% per month. So this is, more like 3 times that. So it's actually a much worse interest rate. He's paying a pretty high interest rate on this. 7% per month is pretty high, and it's because it's through this dealer, and that's how they get you sometimes on these pay-as-you-go plans. They'll say, hey, come buy this furniture, or this house, or this car, or whatever, and no money down, no interest for so many months until you miss one payment, and then in the fine print, all of a sudden you're paying really high interest rates because you missed one payment, and that's where people get stuck on this kind of stuff. So you want to be a little careful about those kind of plans. Here you go. He's got 7% interest per month on the balance, so he's going to pay 7% on that $2,500 loan. So we're just going to take the $2,500, we're going to multiply it. Again, we want to turn 7% to a decimal, so we're going to make that 7 into a decimal by moving the decimal that's typically behind the 7 here over 2 spots. So we get 0.07, and that's what we're going to multiply 2,500 by, and that'll tell us how much he's actually paying in interest each month. So he has 2,500 times 0.07, and he ends up with $175 a month, and that is just crazy, right? That's a ton of money. He's paying almost $200 a month just in an interest payment. If he's paying off the motorcycle, he's actually paying more than this because he's also going to pay a little bit of that $2,500 each month. So he's probably paying $300-400 a month, but almost 200 of it's going to just interest. If he, had waited 3 months and saved up, $600 in interest, they would have been paying an interest. He could have had $600 more down to buy the motorcycle, and then maybe wouldn't have missed that first payment if he had saved up a little bit or something. So this is one place where people can really lose a lot of money. And this is actually why banks make so much money, is because they actually charge a lot of money in interest, and they know that those little interest payments every month, they add up over time. That's how people make their money. If they can charge you interest and get you to pay that interest, then they can make a lot of money on those interest payments. So really watch out for that. There's certain situations where you're almost stuck kind of getting some interest payments. Things like, it's hard to buy a house without a loan. It's hard to buy a car sometimes without a loan. If you can avoid it, that's great. But if you can't, you have to do it. But try not to use it in a whole lot of situations. Like if you could avoid buying furniture, or maybe like a fun thing like a motorcycle, stuff like that, with loans. If you can avoid that, if you can wait another couple months and then pay cash instead of having to borrow money for it, you can save a lot of interest money. So that's something to watch out for. Okay, we mentioned we're going to talk about budgets. Budgets are definitely a big part of this. So making a budget means keeping track of how much money you have coming in and going out. How much are you earning? How much are you spending? And then deciding what adjustments you need to make. If you know how much you have coming in, you know how much going out, then you could sit there and tweak things. Say, okay, I'm spending too much in this thing. I need to maybe bring down my spending. I'm spending not, I'm probably not investing enough in this. I should probably do more. Invest in like retirement, or just putting money away for future expenses. So keeping a budget that keeps you from spending more than you earn and can actually help you save for emergencies. If you think about how much you're going to have set aside each month, think about future times when you'll need it. Budget's a great way to do that. Now, there are 4 things you need to do to make a budget. First off, you need to look at all your monthly income. So list the things where you have income. If you have a part-time job, if you're a student and you have scholarships and loans and stuff like that you're using for paying school bills, you can include those. Gifts that you get typically, if you have a grandma that always gives you the same amount of money every year for Christmas or something like that, you can include those in your budget. So you will need to prorate these. It just means, the fancy word prorate just means convert it to a kind of a regular period amount. So if you're being paid every other week for your job. You can prorate that into a monthly amount, or just combining a whole month's income and seeing what you make per month. Or things like scholarships, you only get like once or twice a year. You could divide that up into, how much that would end up being per month. So getting a monthly amount is helpful because when you want to make a budget, we're going to make monthly budgets for this. It's nice to have monthly amounts for your income. So we're going to look at all the monthly amounts for our income. And then, of course, we're going to look at our monthly expenses. I'm not going to look at every single expense, but I'm going to say, okay, here's all the money I spent on groceries for the month, or here's all the money I spent on gas for the month, and think on those kind of things. So look at your monthly expenses. Again, some expenses are not monthly. You have things like tuition, maybe vacations, gifts that you only do once or twice a year. So if you can kind of divide that up throughout the year. Say, yeah, you only pay tuition twice a year. So divide it up and say this is this much per month. So we'll prorate those as well. Now, once you find your income and your expenses, you find your cash flow. Cash flow is an important word. Cash flow means your income minus your expenses. So cash flow is how much money you have either coming in or going out, because sometimes your income is bigger, which is great, then you have money coming in. Sometimes your income is smaller, and income minus expenses ends up being negative. So cash flow can be negative. In that situation, if you have a negative cash flow, it means your expenses are greater than what you're earning, and you're actually overspending each month. And you really need to avoid doing that as much as possible. You don't want to be spending more than you're earning. There might be certain situations where you might do that temporarily. I know being a college student, sometimes you make a little less than you spend because college is expensive and you don't have a lot of time to work for, jobs and stuff when you're actually doing school. But once you're out of school and you're working a regular job, then you should always try to be in a situation where you're earning at least a little bit more than you're spending. If you need to cut your spending a little bit to do that, if you need to increase your income a little bit to do that, so that's a good thing to do. So cash flow, the important one, cash flow, again, it's income minus expenses. I get a lot of people, I've seen on the test before, people do cash flow and just do the income. No, that'd be nice. It'd be nice if cash flow was always how much you earn. It'll always be positive. But cash flow is your income minus expenses. It's how much you have left over after you take away expenses. And of course, if it's negative, you don't have anything left over, you're overspending. Once you know your cash flow, if you have a negative cash flow, you can start making adjustments. You can look at things you can do better. Is there a way I can lower my expenses? Is there a way I can increase my income? Look at those things. Even if you have a positive cash flow, you might still look at your budget and say, well, I still kind of spend too much on this, or maybe I would like to invest more in this kind of savings account for a future situation. So usually you can make some kind of adjustments once you have your budget created. A budget helps you do that. It helps you adjust. And in fact, I think just the act of creating a budget, of just gathering information about how much you have coming in, how much you have going out, will cause you to make adjustments. Because when you start seeing how much money you're making, how much money you're spending, it'll change your mindset. You start going, oh, okay, well, I'm spending that much and I'm making this much, and maybe I should make these changes to how I'm doing things. All right, let's look at an example. So we usually charge college expenses at the beginning of each semester. However, many colleges will allow you to make monthly payments instead of paying the entire bill at one time. So Jill pays $4,000 in tuition and $800 in fees every semester for the school year. We want to find her monthly cost for the school year. Now, there's a couple ways to do this because we're trying to get this to be a monthly cost, and this is tuition and fees is each semester. We're going to say there's 2 semesters per year, right? That's pretty typical. That's what we do here at BH. So there's 2 semesters per year. So twice a year she's spending $4,000 plus $800. So of course you can add those up and see that she's spending $4,800 per semester. We want to find out how much is she spending per month. Now there's 2 approaches. The first approach, and this one I think is maybe a little more direct, is just say, well, one semester is about 6 months of the year, right? Because there's 2 semesters per year. Divide the year in half, so that's 6 months per semester. So we can just take this amount, this $4,800, and divide it into the 6 months. So that's one way to do this. Just divide it by 6. And that will give us her monthly cost. What is it? $800, I believe. So 648 divided by 6 gives me 8, bring down the zeros. So $800 per month. That's pretty straightforward. You do have to be careful what number to divide by, right? Notice that we divide by 6 because there are, in half a year. And there's 2 semesters a year, so each semester covers about half a year. And the real school semester is only like 4 months, but that leaves out the summer, so we're including the summer as well. That's why we're going to get 6 months. Now, a second approach to this, this would be a different method. And these are both valid, so you can do either one. The other method is instead of trying to take things and divide by like how many months, sometimes that might not be super clear when people start talking about like quarters, stuff like that. It could be like, oh, how many months is that? Another way to do this is actually to figure out how much they spend for a year and then divide that by 12, because there's always months in a year. So the other method would say, okay, well, there's $4,800 per semester, so we can take this $4,800, we can multiply it by 2 because she pays it twice, right? Once for each semester. And in this case, that gives us $9,600 per year. So we turn it into a yearly amount, and then we can divide by 12. And if you always turn things into a yearly amount, then you can always divide by 12 to get the monthly amount. So we're going to take 9,600 divided by 12, but we get the same 800. If you're not sure, you can type in your calculator. You can take the 9,600 and divide it by 12, and you get that same $800. So it's the same answer, just different ways to get the same thing. So this is just a different method, because we take that yearly amount, divide it by 12 months, because there's 12 months in a year, and we get that monthly amount. So I really don't have a preference which way you do it. It kind of depends on what you're comfortable with. If you find it more comfortable just to do the division, have one step be done, that's fine. If you like to turn these things into yearly amounts, and then divide by 12, that's a nice way to do it. Because this is usually kind of an estimation thing a little bit, there's a little room for rounding error, stuff like that. Some things will be a little different. So it's not a big deal if you have a little bit of rounding. That's why we're using nice round numbers, because in real life, you probably don't spend exactly $300 in tuition and fees. There's probably a little bit more precise number, but we're just kind of getting a ballpark. Because most of the time budgeting, you're kind of getting a ballpark idea. You're doing a little bit of estimation, rounding stuff off a little bit. Yeah, so it works either way. We need to get that monthly amount. This would be called a prorated amount. So yes, she's not actually spending $800 each month. She's spending $4,800 at the beginning of the semester. That $4,800 all at once. But when you go to do your budget, you think about that as being an $800 per month expense, an expense that you pay, $800 each month over the 6 months. And you do that throughout the whole year since you have for 2 semesters. So that's what we'll do. So when we go to make your budget, you have to get these prorated amounts. If you want everything in the same time frame, you want everything in months before you start figuring out how your budget works. Okay, we mentioned cash flow again. Cash flow is really big. Cash flow, again, is the difference between your income and so we said if your cash flow is positive, making more than you spend. And that's a great place to be, but it's a hard place to be sometimes. If your cash flow is negative, you are spending more than you earn, and that's usually something to avoid. You can't do much about it, and you have to dip into savings to make up the difference. But if you don't have savings, then you're out of luck. You have to borrow money or do something else. You might have to drastically cut expenses. Give up something. So typically, if we see a negative cash flow, we really look at ways to cut expenses and increase income and correct our cash flow. So let's look at a couple examples. We'll do some budgeting for a couple people. So first one here, we're going to prorate the following expenses and find the corresponding monthly expense. So we'll look at Kyle's expenses and figure out what he's paying. So Kyle pays $75 per week for health insurance. He has an annual $360 for life insurance and a semi-annual premium of $600 for automobile insurance. So right now, if you look at it, you go, wow, he's spending so much for his auto insurance. Right? $600 is huge. But then you stop and go, wait a second, though. These are all different time periods, right? The $75 per week, the $360 is an annual. That's once a year. And the $600 is actually semi-annual. So they're all going to be different because they're in different time periods. If I want to make these all monthly, I'm going to have to change them. First one, $75 per week. Now we're going to typically think of that as 4 weeks per month. That's not exactly accurate because 4 weeks would be like 28 days, and there's actually more like 30 days in a month typically. But this is close enough, and so that's what we'll use. You'll see that on the notes or the homework on the quiz and exam and stuff like that. If I gave you something in weeks, I just want you to think of it as 4 weeks makes a month. So for something like this, where he has $75 per week, all I have to do is say, okay, well, if he pays that once every week, and there's 4 weeks in a month, we can just multiply. Typically like this, if you have a small time frame, like per week, and you want to go to a bigger time frame, like month, you multiply to get that bigger amount, right? We want to get a whole month, so we're going to multiply by 4, and that'll tell us how much he's actually spending. What is that, $300? So he's spending $300 per month. So his, health insurance didn't look that bad because it was $75, but it was per week. It's actually $300 per month, so that makes a big difference. Next, we go to his life insurance. Well, life insurance is annual. Annual, again, is just a fancy word for yearly. So his life insurance, he's paying $360 for a whole year. To get monthly, we have to divide that by 12 months in a year, right? Because the 12 months is 1 year. So I'm just going to divide by that 12. So anything that's already an annual amount, you always divide by 12 to get a monthly amount. So in this case, we actually end up with $30 per month. Now this 360 looks so bad compared to 75, but then when you turn it to both into per month amounts, you can see it's actually much cheaper, which kind of makes sense because you probably pay a little bit more for health insurance than you do for life insurance. Life insurance is usually a little bit cheaper because most people don't die when they're young paying for the life insurance. Eventually you do pass away, you die, but it's going to be probably years till that happens. Whereas health insurance, you can get sick anytime when you're young, old, whatever, and have medical bills. You can get injured, that kind of stuff. So those tend to be a little bit more expensive. So yeah, so is health insurance, life insurance. Last one we have here is the automobile insurance. Automobile insurance, he's paying on a semi-annual, means twice a year. This is back to like we talked on the last page where you can take and say, okay, well, there's 6 months in every half year, and you can divide by 6. Or you could take this and get a whole year's worth. If he's paying this twice a year, you could double it, get $1,200, and then divide by 12 to get a monthly amount. Either way we work, I'm going to divide by 6. I'm going to say there's $600, and he's doing it semi-annually. So for every 6 months, he's paying $600. I'm going to divide by 6 and see that he's actually paying $100 per month for auto insurance. So his actual big expense is this, health insurance. Next biggest is the automobile, and then the last is the life insurance. So he's actually paying $430 per month on his insurance. So that's what he's doing. So things like this are part of budgeting. You just think, oh, how much am I actually spending on insurance? But part of it you look at stuff and say, oh, well, this bill comes once every 6 months. This bill comes every week. This bill comes every month. So to compare those and combine those, you have to get them all to be the same time frame and put them together, which is what we did here. We got them all to be monthly. Okay, let's try that one. Canaan's expenses include $600 per month for rent, $4,500 twice a year for tuition and fees, $60 worth of groceries each week, $240 a year for renter's insurance. Those are his expenses. He has a part-time job at which he earns $650 per month, so that's earnings, income. He receives $5,000 in scholarships and grants for the year. If we assume that his pay is after taxes, meaning we don't have to worry about taxes, we're not going to try and do that yet. We actually will get to taxes toward the end of this unit, but for now we'll leave those off. And that 1 month equals 4 weeks. So 1 month is 4 weeks. Again, that's going to be our common assumption. If you get something in weekly, we'll just multiply by 4 to get monthly. We want to know his net cash flow. Well, to do this, first we're going to have to find his income, and then we're going to have to find his expenses. So first, let's look at his income. His income includes this $650 per month. That one's already monthly, so we don't have to do any changes to it. We could just leave it as $650 because that is already per month. So that's going to be his earnings from his job. The $5,000 in scholarships and grants is for the year. So that $5,000, since that's a yearly amount, we're going to have to divide that by 12 to get a monthly amount. So that's pretty common. Stuff like scholarships is not throughout the whole year. It's just once a year. So we'll have to take that, we'll have to divide it up. Divide by 12, and we get 416. And like I said, we'll usually kind of round stuff like this. So here I'd round appropriately. Do watch my math lab. When you're doing the homework in my lab, it's going to tell you what to round to. So watch that for rounding. Let's just round this to 417 because that's the nearest whole dollar. We're not going to worry about so much about the 66 cents. In fact, by doing 417, we're kind of overestimated a little bit, which is probably a good way to do it with the scholarship. You know, just a little bit of an overestimate, not a big deal. Okay, so 417 per month. And those are his only incomes, right? He only has this job and scholarships. So total income, if we add those up, he's got 1,067 in income. That's not cash flow, that's just income. Now again, remember, cash flow is income minus expenses. So we still have to do expenses. So let's look at his expenses. His expenses, things he's spending on, include that $600 per month for rent. So every month he's got to pay rent for his apartment or wherever he's living. $4,500 twice a year for tuition and fees. So this $4,500, again, that's for twice a year. So that means every 6 months he's paying that. I would divide that by 6 again. Or again, if you don't like doing this, you know, if you want to, you could multiply it times 2, get a whole year's amount, and divide by 12. I'll just go ahead and divide that by 6. 4,500 divided by 6. So he's paying $750 per month. That's for, you know, tuition and fees, which makes sense. You know, college is a little expensive, so that makes sense. So it's kind of a big bill for him. $60 worth of groceries each week, but again, because that's a weekly amount, we're going to multiply that by 4 to get a monthly amount. So again, these weekly amounts, you have to multiply to get bigger. So anything that's less than a month time frame, you know, weekly, bi-weekly, you're going to have to multiply to get bigger to get to a month. Anything that's already bigger than a month, like twice a year or yearly, you're going to have to divide to get down to a month. Here he ends up with $240 worth of groceries each week. So that's $240 that he's spending on groceries. He spends $240 a year for renter's insurance. So I take that $240 a year divided by 12. He ends up with $20. So $20 per month on renter's insurance. That's $20 for the renters. And that's all his expenses. So add those up together and we'll get his expenses. So we have 9, 1, 7, 14, 16. So he is spending $1,610 on expenses versus his $1,067 income. Again, cash flow is always income minus expenses. So to find cash flow, though, we had to do both. We had to find income and expenses, and we take that income, that $1,067, and we subtract that expenses, $1,610, and that gives us our difference. So $1,067 minus $1,610, and we see he's actually in the hole on the month, $543. So he's down $543. So at this point, this is where he would stop and say, okay, my cash flow is not great. My cash flow is a negative $543. So every month, I am spending almost $600 more than I'm earning. I'm not making enough money to cover my expenses. And this is where you have to stop and think about things he could do to adjust. Now, there's lots of things he could do. As a college student, one thing he could do is he could actually take out school loans, right? Because right now, the only thing we have for income is his part-time job and his scholarships grants. He could borrow money to pay off college. Yes, in the long run, he's going to have to pay interest. You have to pay it back, and so it's not the always the best option. But for something like school, where you're going to be working the rest of your life and you're going to be making more money because you went to college, it makes sense to borrow some money to make it through your expenses currently to get to there. Other things he could do, maybe he could look at finding rent cheaper. He's paying $600 per month for rent. If he could split it with a roommate, if he could find a location that's cheaper, that could save him some money. He could look at applying to more scholarships, applying for more grants. If he could raise that, that could help cover more costs. He could try and do things like find a cheaper groceries or rent, but I don't think his groceries and rent are actually that big. You can see that the big expenses are definitely his rent and his tuition and fees. So there's a lot more room to save money there versus maybe his groceries and his renter's insurance. So those are probably not going to save him a lot. Or he could try and make more money. He already makes $650 per month at his part-time job. If he could pick up more hours, he could look for a better part-time job where he makes a little bit more money. And that's the thing. When you do a budget, there's lots of different options. In the real world, there's not just one. This is the easy way to fix things. So you're going to have to look at all the different things you could do. Think about what's the best one for you, what works to fix your situation. And sometimes it is just, borrowing some money for school loans. That might be the option. So. Okay, more about adjusting your budget. If you haven't made a budget before, results really can be surprising. People will be like, oh, I didn't realize that was such a big expense, or I didn't think about how much I spent on this. Usually you find you spend more in categories than you thought, and sometimes it lasts on other ones. Once you evaluate your budget, you'll want to make changes to improve your spending in the future. One way to do that is looking at general spending trends. So this chart here shows the percentage of spending by a category for different age groups, because we kind of tend to change how much we spend in different categories depending on our age. Food, pretty steady throughout. You might spend a little bit less when you're in your middle years, just because you are probably more likely to be making food for a big group of people. There's some cost savings in that. Housing, again, you spend a little bit less in that 35 to 64 year range. Usually those people have paid off their house, so they're not paying as much interest. Once you get to 65 and older, sometimes people are paying more because they have to pay for a place with more, place that they can handle living in. Like my mom's actually buying a house right now in Rapid, and we were thinking about things like she doesn't want to have to be able to go downstairs all the time because she's getting a little bit older, and so when she gets too old, she doesn't want to be stuck in a house where she's stuck on one floor and can't get to the other floor because that wouldn't have as much mobility. And so things like that will change what kind of housing you can pay for and what you can pick. Clothing, as you get older, you tend to buy less clothes. It makes sense because you have clothes you've already bought that you like. Transportation, you don't travel as much on a day-to-day basis as you get older. Healthcare tends to go up, which you can see makes sense. As you get older, you have more health issues you have to take care of, so you end up taking more medical care. Entertainment, you usually tend to spend less when you're older. You're not going out and partying or doing that kind of stuff as much. Donations to charity tend to go up as people get older. And then personal insurance, pensions. Pension, when you're paying to retirement as a pension, you're not really doing that when you're in retirement. So that's why that one goes way down for 65 plus. House insurance, car insurance, stuff like that, you're still paying throughout. So those things aren't really going away, but things like paying for retirement will go down. All right, let's look at Joe's situation. So Joe is a 30-year-old bachelor, works full-time, he earns about $2,800 per month. He is looking at buying a house and has found one he loves. The mortgage payment on the house would run about $800 per month. Joe would like to know if this is an affordable house for him. And this is a good idea. Before you buy a house, it's good to figure out what the payment would be and think, can I afford that payment? Is that going to be a good place for me? Because people end up sometimes where they buy a house, and at first they think they can handle the payment, and then after the long run, they kind of realize that they just can't afford it. So since he's 30 years old, he's gonna fit into that under 30 category. So we're looking for the under 35, and we're looking at housing. So if we look at housing, it's going to be this first red bar for the housing. That's what he's looking at, which means he's going to be somewhere around here. I'd say that's probably close to like 33%, right? This percent. So he wants to spend about 33%. If he's going much higher than that, he's probably overspending on his housing. He's going to have a hard time making his house payments. If he's lower than that, that's probably fine. That'd make a little more room for him to spend on other categories. He's just worried, he doesn't want to be too much over that because then he might be in a situation where he can't afford the house. So we got to figure out what percent would he be paying. Well, he has $2,800 each month that he's making. That's his income. And he wants to spend $800 on that mortgage. So we can find the interest rate. Remember, to find a percent, what we do is we take the part, in this case the $800, and divide it by the whole. When you're trying to find a percent, you always take the part and divide it by the whole. So the part of his income that he spent on the house would be $800. The total income for the month would be the $2,800. These are both per month. Something to watch out for is sometimes you'll have problems where the labels don't match. You really want to watch out. But since these are both per month, we can go ahead and just do this, figure out, do the division, find out what percentage he would be paying out of his income. So if he spends $800 out of his $2,800 per month income, he would be paying 0.2857. Be really careful. This is a decimal amount, not a percent amount. So to turn this into a percent, this would be 28.57%, right? So take this decimal and turn it to a percent, and then the decimal to back the other direction. We've been going from percent to decimal, now we're going to decimal back to percent. And that's actually pretty good. He would be doing great. That actually is under his 33 target. So 28% is realistic, is something he could probably afford. It's not going to be blowing him away and making it hard for him to make his payments if it's under that 30%. 33 is the target. Now in real life, sadly, you don't just get to pay the mortgage payment. Just maybe there could be other things like fixes on the house, repairs, other kind of costs and stuff that he wants to redecorate, stuff like that. So housing might be a little bit more expensive than just 28.5%, but at least this is a reasonable number for him. If he started off and he was at 35-40% just for the mortgage payment, then he'd really want to be wary about buying the house. He'd stop and go, I don't know about this. So that's one way to do it. One way is to find the percent and see how it correlates with the percent he's looking at. So that's one way to do it. Another way we could have done this is we could have just found 33% of his income. So we could do that way. Another way to check this, we take that $2,800 income and just multiply that by 0.33. And that would tell us like how much he could afford. So that'd be a different way to do it. So we could take 2,800 times 0.33, and we can see that he could pay up to about $924. If it goes too much over $924, then he'd be in trouble. Since his payment he would want to make is only $800, he'd be under that target. That would be kind of his max. And since he's under that max, that'd be another way of showing that he's good. So this would be the second way to check. Either one of these would show us that yes, it is affordable. You don't need to do both. I've just showed you both so that we can see, two different options. This would, again, be another method. Instead of finding the percent, you could find how much his payment would be. If you just find out what 33% of the 2,800 is. So yes, it is affordable. Okay, I got one more page. I just dropped my pen. Oh well. Oh, I got 2 more pages. Okay. Susan is a 24-year-old college student that works a part-time job, which earns her about $24,000 per year after taxes. She loves to go out and have a fun time with friends. She watched her spending for the last couple of weeks, and she found that she spent about $45 during the week on entertainment. Using the above chart, determine if Susan is spending an appropriate amount on her entertainment. So looking at Susan being a 24-year-old college student, entertainment, she's probably expecting to be on the high side for most people, but still should be super high. So spend like a third of her budget on it, like housing. So entertainment should be, looks like about 5% would be her entertainment. So she probably shouldn't be spending more than 5% on entertainment. So let's figure it out. Well, looking at this, she has $24,000 per year, and she's spending $45 per week. Now notice those are not the same label. $24,000 per year, this is per week. Before we can compare them, we should probably get them to have the same kind of label. I could take them both to monthly, so I could take $24,000 and divide it by 12, and I could take 45 and multiply by 4. That would be one way, and that would definitely be an option. So if you need to get them the same that way. Another option would just be to make them both yearly or make them both weekly. That would be a different option. So here I think in this case, I'll just make them both yearly, because I can take that $45 per week and I can multiply it by the fact that there are 52 weeks in a year. And that's just kind of about how many weeks there are. So if I multiply that out, that'll give me a yearly amount. So 45 times that 52 weeks in a year, there are $2,340 she's going to spend if she spends $45 a week. So if she sticks with that, $45 per week, she's going to spend this much per year. And so now I can find her percentage, how much she's actually spending on entertainment, by again doing the part. She's spending $2,340. That's the part she's spending on entertainment divided by the whole, her whole income, which is $24,000. 3 zeros is enough. And that will give us the percentage that she's spending on entertainment. So let's do that. $2,340 divided by 24,000. She's got 0.0975. So 0.0975. Again, this is in decimal. We really got to be careful to make sure that we do these percentages, because if we try and compare that 0.09 to this 5%, those don't really compare. You need to turn this into 9.75%, right? We're moving the 2 spots to get that percent. So that gives us our percent. We can say, oh, she's actually spending almost twice what she should, right? Her expenses are almost 10%, and she should only be spending about 5% of entertainment. She's not really making enough money to spend that kind of money on entertainment every week. Now, if she did it every other week, maybe it'd be a lot bigger, less deal, because that'd be half as much if she was only doing it every other week. But if she spends about $45 each week, she's spending probably more than she should. That's greater than about 5%. So too much, not much on entertainment. So Susan should look at ways to maybe lower her expenses for entertainment. Maybe she can do more stuff that's not as expensive to do, more free stuff, hang out with friends somewhere where they're not spending as much money. She could look at increasing her income to pay for those extra expenses. That's something she could do, but she should probably be thinking about that, because right now she's spending a little bit more than's typical on entertainment. All right, last thing. So all this budgeting, looking at your finances, that kind of stuff, it's a great place to start to get to look at your finances and say, okay, this is what I'm spending, this is what I'm earning, and how can I adjust. But in the long run, you also have to look at bigger things, long-term things as well. So look at the long-term. Figuring out your budget is just a start. You need to look at long-term issues, things like paying for college, buying a home, replacing your car, medical bills, investing for retirement. So there's going to be a lot of stuff like that. And we'll look into a bit of this throughout the rest of this unit, because we're going to talk about mortgages for houses. We're going to talk about saving for retirement. We're going to talk about that kind of stuff and how interest works. So we'll get into that more. But here's an example. This is Taylor. She's trying to decide which college is the better value for her. She likes the programs equally. They're about the same distance from home. However, one is in-state. So she's got an in-state school, which means tuitions are much lower. They're only $6,000 for tuition and fees for the year. But she would have to find an apartment which would run about $800 per month. Wherever she's at, it's kind of expensive for the apartments. The other college is out of state, which usually means tuition fees cost a little bit more, so $12,000 versus the $6,000, actually twice as much. But she can get on-campus housing, and it's actually only $400 per month. So even though one school is way more expensive than the other, the housing's a lot cheaper. And she's got to think, okay, well, which one's really the better option? Again, these labels are all mixed up. We've got stuff that's per year, we've got stuff that's per month. So before I can really compare this, we kind of have to have everything with the same labels. So if we look at the in-state, before we can really figure out how much she's going to spend, let's take the $6,000, let's make that a monthly amount. Because if we make everything monthly, divide, this is a per year, $6,000 for the year, so divide that by 12. That will give her a monthly amount. And that's a little bit easier to compare if everything's in the same time frame. So, divide by 12, you get $500. So she's going to spend $500 per month on tuition, and she's spending $800 on apartment. So in total, she's going to spend $1,300 per month if she goes in-state. Out of state, again, it's going to be quite a bit more. It's about double for out-of-state tuition. So now she's spending $12,000, which she divides by 12 is actually $1,000 a month. So she's spent $1,000 per month on just the tuition, but her housing is only $400. So when she goes to add housing, she only has to add $400, and it ends up only being $1,400. So even though out of state is double the tuition, she actually ends up with a much better deal, or well, not much better, but with pretty close to the same amount. The out-of-state tuition, because the room and board is so much cheaper, it's actually only $100 more a month. So they're pretty even at this point. She might actually stop and say, what about other cost of living expenses? Which one's going to have, does the meal plan? If she has to have a meal plan at the out-of-state school, but she doesn't have to have a meal plan in-state, could she eat for cheaper than a meal plan maybe? Or maybe she thinks about commuting times, other stuff like that. But these are really close because the cost of living, the apartment is so much different in price. So first, you look at the 6,000 versus 12,000. That seems like, well, obviously you want to go with the 6,000, but because there's 400 versus the 100 is pretty big difference there as well. It actually ends up being pretty even. And this is the kind of thing you have to do with finance. You have to look at stuff. You have to think about your labels, make sure everything's in those same kind of labels, and look at your expenses and compare. We do this all the time in real life. We stop and say, okay, what's the better cost? What's the better bang for my buck kind of thing. Okay, that's section 4A. That's our first section. Thank you for sticking with me, watching through this. Hopefully this helps you get through all the homework for section 4A and you have a great start to the semester. I'll see you for the next video.